Welcome back to We Know Scripted TV, where today we know Silo Season 2, Episode 6. We have officially entered the second part of Silo Season 2, and we're breaking down barricades here with a concrete saw ready to burst up through the floor. Grace, people don't realize that's how you get into every time you podcast, just
Mhm.
through a nice little trap door you've riggered in your room right now.
Yep, yeah, my landlord is furious at my, breaking of the cement every time
Yeah, but
I
that's why you set up
come
the
into my
little
room.
partition, right? And you
The
stand out
barricade.
menacingly with a large
Mhm.
wrench, being like, "You can't get to me."
That's right, that's right. Yeah, and then he keeps moving the barricade, so annoying. Yeah, Silo, season 2, episode 6, more than halfway done. We'll talk about this one. No Juliet, until the very end of the episode. We'll talk about it. Ups and downs, I think, for me, from Silo, season 2, episode 6.
Well, that's where everyone was traveling up and
That's
down. I mean,
true.
I was intrigued by this because I feel like last episode, yes, obviously everything going on with 18 is a bit of a boil to an eventual, quite literal boiling point, or at least that's what Bernard's trying to prevent, right? Like he's trying
Mhm.
desperately to turn the temperature down on the stove, and those damn mechanicals and everyone else just keep turning it up. And I thought last episode was pretty dragged out. I think by comparison, this episode was definitely better to actually see mechanical quite literally making moves and clearly showing their like non-violent slash threaten as a violence complications of, okay, you think you're going to try this with us, we're going to try this with you. It does feel like we actually did take, again, quite literally some meaningful steps forward towards an eventual conflict, and obviously we accelerated the plot in a couple of other directions. I still have some of my more chief complaints, which is that I do feel like outside of especially like a few characters in Silo 18, they're really trying their damnedest, Grace, to make Knox and Shirley happen, even putting the two of them together.
Mm.
But it's I don't know. It's still not entirely working for me. But again, I will say for me, I was more interested in this episode than the last one.
Yeah, the problem I have with, I think, this episode is that I actually think the like ideas and the content in it are actually good ones, but they don't seem to fit into the place where I thought we were in the season. So I feel like, we did have earlier in the season Knox go down and talk to the guy who makes the weapons, and so we
Hmm.
get the reveal of that this week, that like he has made him weapons. um but I almost feel like we were so it felt like we were on the cusp of rebellion, which I think is like when I was talking um in previous weeks. I feel like the pacing of this season has been a little bit wonky, where I feel like in an effort to keep things between Silo 17 and Silo 18 at the same speed, they're both Silo 17 again for me is like the most interesting stuff. And I really do feel like the rebellion stuff has not been working, because I think it's being forced to be kept at the same pace as the climax of the rebellion needs to happen. That what they want to do
Mm.
is whatever is going to happen over in Silo 17 that ends up being sort of the most exciting thing. But
Right.
it
It
felt,
needs to be
yes,
synced up basically to climax at the same time in terms of storylines.
that's right. And I feel like that's has not been working to me, because it felt like we were at the boiling point basically as soon as Juliet walked over the hill. And I don't really feel like they did a good enough job explaining how the like tension and frustrations in Silo 18 were sort of, it was like, okay, everything's sort of back to normal, except there's also like Judge Meadows has also been killed, right? I just feel like the like that has been so disjointed, Silo 18 stuff, in a way that I actually really like a lot of the ideas, but they feel like they should have happened earlier in the season, um, rather than like we've been building up to like move the barricade down 2 floors or up 2 floors or whatever to get a farm. I don't know. That feels pretty boring to me, Mike.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I do feel like this pacing and this plot line does make sense for me in the perspective of Bernard, where we come back from episode 2, and I actually think that episode 6 really reminds me of episode 2 in a lot of ways. First, the fact that it is by and large not Juliet centric. She's not even involved in until the very last 3 minutes, as opposed to episode 2 where she's not in it at all. The fact that Bernard in episode 2 is left reeling, obviously trying to prevent a Silo 17 situation happening, and was able to like somehow land on his feet in a way that none of us expected, with him crafting this big speech and this big lie of, oh, I was actually helping Juliet with the tape, and then bringing Meadows aboard and everything. And now we get to see that he's not batting 1,000, that what he tried to do with killing Judge Meadows and framing Knox and Shirley and putting Sims as a judge. You know, we talked about sort of the death of 1,000 paper cuts that might be coming for Bernard, and all the ways in which the decisions that he's making from a very engineered, algorithmic perspective, right? He's going to tell Judge Meadows' body, like, yeah, I thought I had planned for all the variables, all the constants, and then I had to incorporate you into the equation. And he was able to balance the numbers in episode 2. But I think what we're seeing in this episode that differs for me, and that does make sense given, like, okay, it makes sense that we had Bernard succeed to show, like, the power that he can hold, and then to see how it all quickly falls apart out of his hand. That, you know, he's going to try these nonviolent tactics of starving or basically poisoning the people in the Down Deep to really foster this conflict between them. But he's going to leave with so much rat poison laced egg on his face by the end of this, and assumingly moving forward, because everything that he has done, from, again, this framing tactic to basically firing Sims by promoting him and putting this guy in his stead who clearly is not doing a very good job, is leading to more of a headache for him.
Yeah, I guess for me, the piece that I think has not been working is it's not, to me, it's not really clear enough why the silo isn't in full-blown rebellion. I feel like the poisoning of the like literally poisoning the food supply feels like so, but or the opposite too, like the way in which I just feel like maybe there's not enough, you know, people involved in this, and I feel like that's strange because what I want is actually like deeper character stuff in
Down deeper.
in the rebellion side, and then when they give it to me, I'm like, oh, I don't really care about Knox and Shirley being in a relationship, so maybe I don't know what I want. But I just feel like it all just feels like not a cohesive, like, you know, infrastructure of the world. It feels really like this thing's happening over here, but it doesn't feel directly connected to a lot of what else. Not completely. I do feel like that there are ways that there are. I think the Billings stuff is probably the most interesting stuff we got this episode, to me, of the way in which, like, even though he makes a stand, he's also seemingly like he's not choosing the rebellions.
Right. He's like, I take the side of the law, which ironically enough is me basically like not breaking the law, but not answering to the whims of my superior.
Right. Yeah, following the law as it was intended to be enacted, not the way in which people choose to wield it for their own power. So I thought that stuff was like good, at least. But yeah, I do the Bernard stuff. I do think is also something that is working for me. It's, I guess the unfortunate part for me here is that I feel like you can have it where both sides of like a conflict like this are not as interesting as the other, but I feel like it's less effective when it's the side we're not rooting for. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like the fact that it's Bernard's side of things that I think is much more like interesting and complex, that it makes it really uneven, because then I just feel like, oh, but then I'm not rooting for the bad guy, but I find the bad guy side of things far more interesting than I'm finding the, like, you know, the rebels and the good and the side, like,
right,
the good side.
No, it's a really interesting dynamic because it's basically like, from his perspective, kind of fascism to prevent the apocalypse. That
Right.
Bernard sees something that no one else could see, or very little could, which was like, oh, I know what the outside world is like, and you all want to go out there, and that's a bad thing. That's going to kill us all. And the only way I can teach you that is to basically like keep you down and make you believe in this universe that I put into your heads. It's a very odd sort of comparison, Grace, but I've had musical theater on my mind. Maybe we'll talk about that at a plug towards the end. But there is a musical from 2003 called Urinetown, and Urinetown was sort of this like Brechtian musical comedy about a world where a corporation like did pay per stall bathrooms, and you had to pay every time you went to the bathroom. And like,
Okay.
then they lead this big uprising amongst the people against the proletariat, or the proletariat overthrow the bourgeoisie, as it were, and took over. And then the epilogue is like, well, as stringent as this corporation was in paying to go to the bathroom, and it was an effective way of rationing water, and eventually all the water went away and dried up and everybody died. The end. And like, it's a really bleak but unique way to kind of look at these circumstances, where I agree. Just when you take a look at all these other characters and you feel bad for the subjugation that they're under, you get a scene like Bernard does at Judge Meadows' corpse, where he's, in tears, basically being like, I'm trying everything I possibly can to prevent this from happening in the only way I know how to.
Yeah, I think the other piece of it that does work for me in terms of the Bernard stuff is that he's in this interesting situation where the way in which he has to like enact the rule to seemingly protect people is also built up under this sort of like, it's funny because it's both a lie and not a lie, in the sense that it is true that if you leave the silo you will die, but also the way that they have clearly like hid so like whenever somebody goes out, like we saw in the first 2 episodes of the season, when they go out outside, they are made to think that they see like, a lush livable environment, which is wrong. And so he has to sort of both uphold like this thing that is true, but then there's also ways in which like the way that they're doing it is shady and not true, and not giving all of the truth. And so he has to sort of like balance those two things in a way that like, and again, the thing I keep going back to is like, Bernard is our villain of the show, but he has somebody he reports to, right? So there's more to this. And I, the other piece too is like, I think it's kind of like silly the way we got to it, but the Lucas stuff to me also is interesting in terms of the way that he enacts somebody, puts somebody who he otherwise would have sent to their death to become his shadow, and provide him information by swearing him in.
Yeah, that, I do think that still in hindsight, knowing we get to this point, maybe a little clumsy to not have this character in the first 3 episodes of the season whatsoever, and then bring him in for one small scene in episode 4, and now be like, and now you're the shadow to Bernard. But at the same time, I think from Bernard's perspective, it symbolizes kind of how he's grasping at straws and really trying everything. Is like, all right, if I am losing hold of everything else that's happening in the silo, I need to figure out what else is going on that could possibly help me. And so let me recruit whomever I need to, no matter what random character from the show's perspective might fall into my lap. And so it's so interesting because, again, Bernard, as we know, very picky with who is his shadow. He had Meadows. She left. He did not pick a shadow again for a very, very long time, to Sim's chagrin. But here, he just kind of throws out the title willy-nilly to be, and it's more of a formality to be like, okay, I have to let you in on this big secret, and so you're going to be my shadow. Congratulations. Clearly, his heart isn't in it, Grace.
Yeah. I agree, because we were so confused by Lucas not showing up, because we knew basically from the books that he was an important part, and we thought they just wrote him out, and then it turns out they just have sort of like figured out another way to get him to the point that he is in the books. He is the shadow. He is Bernard's shadow. It's just not quite as forced, I guess, as it is here. We also get Bernard's conversation with Camille as well, which I think is interesting, where he basically knows that she's not basically like telling him everything.
Yeah, he basically locked onto what she actually did last episode, which was that she was leading this team of raiders, and that she helped the fugitives and Knox and Shirley hide to evade the raiders and the citizens from coming after them. And she is in denial, but he also says, what's your husband going to do when he finds out that this is the case? And I'm trying to remember, I don't believe that information has been told to Sims just yet. Obviously, the two of them are telling each other about other things that are happening, but if and when that happens, I don't know. It'll be a tough situation between the two, that's for sure.
Yeah, and Carla's also been seemingly locked up by Bernard as well to like as a right. That's what Billings thinks as well, right?
Yeah, that's what Billings is trying to figure out with Walker, is that he assumes that I don't know, maybe she got put in like the Patrick Kennedy route of like basically institutionalized, which is no bueno for her. I mean, it's tough for me because Walker was one of my favorite characters coming into season 2. Kind of feels like they're
Um,
not doing a lot with Harriet Walter.
I would agree with that. I think that yeah, I'm just do you know what one of my things is that Harriet Walter is so good at playing evil, and she's playing the complete opposite. This time, like she does have a little bit of edge, but she's pretty firmly in the like good person camp on the show.
Mhm.
And I feel like I wonder if that's just like not working for me. I feel like her best roles have been as Shiv's mom in Succession, and like the boy, like the Roy's mom in Succession, and then the
Mm.
in Killing Eve as well. She's pretty much an awful person in both of both of those in a way that she's very good at. And I'm like, wonder if this is why it's not working for me.
I don't know. It also might be like, listen, I am all for improving on your mental health, but like the agoraphobia was also like an interesting characteristic of hers as well. Like, her ability to really overcome that, and how she had so much liberty as a character, but then from Irony of Irony, she was one of the most like confined characters in the environments that she existed in. So like, it just seems like this season they kind of just have her in Carla mode, where ever since she made her, basically ever since the finale when she worked alongside Carla, that's kind of been her entire storyline up to this point. I will say though, I really did enjoy that scene with her and Pete. That's what's interesting, Grace, is you talked about how, yeah, understandably things do feel a little stratified, but it seems like, again, something that makes this episode different for me than maybe some of the other ones is that it does feel like we are starting to kind of commingle basically everybody against Bernard. And like to have Camille interact with Knox and Shirley last episode, and then this one to have Billings play such a big role in everything going on in the Down Deep. And then even to have someone like Pete, who has been like largely apolitical in all of this and kind of separate from everything. He rebels in his own way, which is healing people. To have him play a part in this, I thought it was going to be honestly much more dangerous and life-threatening than it ended up being, especially when like he runs into when Mrs. Billings ends up searching him out and bringing him down. Like, I thought this was going to be, oh no, it's going to be in the wrong time, in the wrong place, sort of like what happened with Cooper, where when they come back with the guns and the big wrenches, when they do battle, that's going to take him out. But no, it seems like it was just an opportunity to mix these characters together for the first time, which I will gladly take as well.
Yeah, I like the Walker and Peter scene. Although I think that that's mostly because I think Peter might be one of the most interesting characters on the show. I think he's probably like my ranking is probably some form of Solo, Juliet, Bernard, Peter, I
Billings.
don't Billings. Yeah, that's probably right. That's probably my top 5. So I think anytime you have one of the more, I feel like that's also a big reason this episode for me struggles, is because you've taken out 2 of the most interesting characters in the show, in Juliet and Solo, and also you left us on a cliffhanger last episode, and then basically, I mean, I don't know if I want to save a whole segment for it later, but like basically they're like, that's fine. Like, oh my god, okay, fine, whatever. But yeah, Peter and Walker are chatting, and they're such an interesting dynamic because like they are essentially like she is a like a maternal figure to Juliet,
Right, they're
and
both kind of
he's
like Juliet's parental figures in her life.
yeah, and then she's and they're both in this weird spot where like in an essence of like trying to figure out what happens after this thing happened. And that to me actually there is something I think actually really interesting to that, and actually a piece of like Walker's storyline that I feel like would be more compelling than what they're doing is, and actually I guess it is in the scene. I guess this is the what I think is the strongest part of this episode in terms of Walker content, is this thing of he says, do you think she's alive? And she's like, no, I don't think she possibly could be, even though I gave her the tape. Like, I still don't think that would have been enough. And so I maybe the idea of Juliet as as a symbol, and I actually think season 1 was really good, had this really strong knack for, I mean, when you're looking at like a futuristic show, like the fact that like a Pez dispenser was as important as it was in season 1 is like, that might seem silly, but I do think it's like it's powerful. Like we
Yeah.
have them now and they're like pointless little candy dispensers, right? But like how that could become a symbol, and I feel like Juliet becoming a symbol is something that I thought was really done really well last week when Peter is talking to Bernard about
Mhm.
like having her belongings, and that once basically like it doesn't really matter where they, and like, as long as the idea of her is out there, like she's a symbol. Even the um what gets written on the, oh, it's in the food, the note, there's a the last line is Juliet lives, right?
Yes, yes,
um
that like one of the from 120, right, which is where they kind of end up taking resonance at the end, had sent them down a bunch of unpoisoned food saying Juliet lives.
Yeah, so what I do like about the scene with Walker is this idea that to perpetuate the symbol of like the Flame Keepers and this idea of like building a better world and doing the right thing, you have to keep this idea like this. The more that Juliet lives is embodied as a thing, whether or not it's true, but you're also grieving the actual person who is Juliet, who is then becoming a symbol for everything else. That to me is like really interesting thematics that I'm a little disappointed that I'm now realizing like we've basically gotten that like in like 2 scenes over this season so far.
Well, it's also really interesting because Walker does have a little bit of role to play in the rebellion, right? Like she was the one that came walking down the tunnel a couple episodes ago, being like, "What are you all doing here? I'm going to join you." To even this time around, when Knox and Shirley are trying to really quell the masses about everything going on with the food, being like, "We're mechanical. We work together. We tighten our belt straps." Everyone's like, "Yeah, okay, we don't believe that anymore. Every man for himself." But by and large, it seems like these two, and maybe it's due to the age demographics of it all, but they kind of seem like people that, despite having not seen it all in their lifetimes, are kind of sitting back and watching everything unfold on them and are kind of making commentary on it in a manner of speaking. Pete, especially. I mean, despite the fact that he does do things actively, he just kind of has a bit of a passive presence of like so much stuff has happened to him that he has kind of taken on this idea of, yeah, that's just the way the world is. I gotta
Mm.
just put one foot in front of the other and see where it takes me. And so it was a really interesting connection for a lot of reasons. Like you said, their shared history with Juliet, but also I kind of feel like they both see the world in a similar way. And so that's
Yeah.
why it did make it very unique as well to have both of them be essentially of the same mind, saying, yeah, listen, we're both logical characters at the end of the day. In fact, maybe the two most logical characters, she's probably dead, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Um Q2, don't worry, she's not there.
So we're just very badly infected.
And it's already been bandaged up and fixed. Don't worry, it's fine.
Thanks to
Oh my.
Solo Pharmacy. So
Uh,
we'll
worst
get into
cliffhanger ever last week, I think, officially.
well, we'll get into that in a little bit. Let's talk about the billings of it all, because I agree this was definitely the most intriguing thing of the episode. And look, we've been dealing a bit with like Billings PI over the course of this entire season. I mean, he hasn't gone up to his office. It seems like he's basically been in mechanical for like the past 3 episodes, looking into this incident that happened with Patrick Kennedy. So yeah, it feels like for the past few episodes we've been dealing with this Billings PI of it all, where he was looking into the incident with Patrick Kennedy, found out that Patrick Kennedy wasn't dead. He's very much alive and he is very annoying. And yeah, this is a brand new Billings in this episode in many ways from what we've seen prior. I mean, he's like still a little bit of a goody two shoes, right? He still does say at the end, I only did this thing because I follow the law, not necessarily what's going on with your two sides. But like, he's aggressively banging chairs around. He's threatening to basically send Kennedy back where he came from in this torturous asylum that Sims had put him in. And then he goes a little rogue and finally figures out, learns this information about what was on that disk that ended up permeating all the computers at the end of last season, and is starting to wake up a bit on his own as well, and realizes to gain some new initiative, and as a result, perhaps gain better control of his body.
Yeah, so I really like a lot of this stuff. I mean, even we didn't really talk about, I really liked Kathleen being the one to like go get Peter and like
Yeah, it
get
was a really,
down.
really nice connection they made last episode to make that carry through.
Yeah, to get him down to be able to do this to Kennedy, to help Kennedy. Um, I like all of the stuff, including like, the moral stance. And I think it's more interesting than just being like, I'm on the side of the rebels now. It's more complicated than that, in the sense that like he might not actually fully agree with the way that side is doing all the things they're doing, but also recognizing that Bernard has basically like broken the law and likely
Hmm.
killed Meadows. So he takes the stand. I don't know that I am fully on board with the like, your symptoms fix themselves.
It's all psychosomatic. Well, because I also know that there was some theories as to like the syndrome actually being a thing, right? And not to say that this proves that it doesn't, but it seems like it was more psychological than physical.
Yeah, so I guess that's a real thing that happens to people, that it like from stress or whatever. But why, there is still the thing of like, why does it happen to some people and why does it not happen to others, in a way that honestly I think I'm like less interested. And it's unfortunate because this is one of the things that Silo, it's a show creation, not from the book, and I thought was one of the actual like pretty good mysteries in terms of like figuring that out. If this is kind of the answer that you could, I guess what I'm saying is I don't necessarily, I, I I guess I'm not totally against it as I'm like trying to talk through it. My one instinct is that like you can make yourself better just by is like not something that I always fully agree with.
You
Like this,
think there's a little bit of pseudoscience being brought into Silo?
yeah, well, a little bit of like, it's like when they're like, don't be depressed, just be happy. And it's that's not how it works. So I'm a little, I'm a little hesitant to be like, oh, I love, like, I like this. I don't like it so far. It doesn't mean there can't be a way that they write this into the show that ends up working
Right.
for me. So yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's it's very salient. I think especially to map it onto, mental health and other chronic conditions, especially to maybe have the message be like, well, he just kind of didn't like his job and was very nervous about it. And then once he gained the confidence to stand up to his boss, then he was okay. Is it a bit of an odd messaging? I am hopeful that still it's odd to say that I'm hopeful that the tremors continue, but considering how much of a taboo subject it is, to the point where like they said if anyone knew about it, he'd get fired from his job and sent to the mines. Yeah, I hope it wouldn't necessarily be like the equivalent of the yips.
I mean, I guess the other piece to it is that like I guess it doesn't seem, because I'm not against the idea that there are things that people struggle with in their life that they get then ostracized for, that is actually the fault of a society that is not like equipped to support people who like, and that the reason why you end up dealing with things are because of the environment in which you live in and work in. So for example, like I live with type 1 diabetes, but type 2 diabetes is something that like we could actually be doing a lot more
Mm,
work from a government standpoint to make our cities more walkable, food more affordable, things like that would actually make the prevalence of living with diabetes um, uh, better. But to me, like if that's where they're going, I'm more happy with that. I'm less happy if it's just like, you know, I think the one piece of that would need to be work for me is to just get a sense of how many people they have potentially sent to the mines because they have basically the condition or the syndrome, to just show how actual prevalent and how the problem is the way in which the silo is created, like, and functions as a society that causes that many people to then have, something like that. But so far I'm a little hesitant about this, the way that the syndrome story is playing out. But otherwise I do think, because then the other thing is like, oh, you didn't take your herbs for what, and I was like, well, are the herbs causing, have they been causing the condition? But I don't think it's that, especially an episode where they talk about specifically poisoning the rest of the
mhm.
food. Although maybe that's the link.
But
I don't
yeah,
know.
I mean, it's whether or not we incorporate that into Billings' character. I think it is really interesting that he has. I wouldn't even say come around, because again, he was an inquisitive character even amidst all the shady shit that was being done to Juliet. But he has really opened his eyes to the idea of, as you really eloquently put before, like people are using this pact that you have swore your life to execute things of their own will. that
Right.
really kind of like stand and spit in the face of those that had created it in the first place. And to have Billings, as we talk about, rebellion has many forms. To have Billings kind of stage his own rebellion by kind of non-action in radioing Bernard and being like, yeah, I know where the fugitives are, but my hands are tied. I can't capture them until I launch a full investigation into Judge Meadows' death because I think it might be sabotage. Honestly, I think my favorite line of the episode was Bernard telling himself, F me, I've lost the sheriff.
Yeah.
And it does make me wonder, especially if he does feel like he might have someone like Lucas in his pocket now. Grace, did Billings just, put his neck out there to possibly get his head chopped off later on? Do you think this could be enough for someone to take a hit at a sheriff and try to put in someone in his place who would be a little more supplicating, much like Billings was supposed to be in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things here with the Billings thing that I want to talk about is I do think, we talked about this, like his view of the pact. I actually think this is actually a pretty relevant it's kind of relevant, I think, to a discussion that is actually happening. And again, I feel like on these pods, I feel like over the last few weeks, I've been like, I'm about to say something, Mike, that I feel like it's going to sound like I'm a wild stretch, but bear with me, which is I feel like the response to what happened to the United Healthcare CEO, there has been some discussion about whether or not like the level of frustration that has happened, to which people are basically taking some glee in the fact that somebody has been murdered, is because of, I think, the amount of frustration people have with the current system and the
Are you
status
saying
quo.
that the McDonald's that Luigi held
Mhm.
out in is mechanical
That's right.
McDonald's?
That's right. McDonald's. And I guess the point I'm trying to make is I do feel like I'm hearing this discussion about the ways in which so this is I'm going to speak as a Canadian, though I'm talking about American
Mhm.
systems. So bear with me if you will, and I'll try not to be too preachy and judgmental because Canada also has its own problems. But I think that there is this level to which what I think that showed me was the way that people were sort of celebrating that happening, or at least not bothered by it, was because of the ways in which, like, for many people who are around my age and who are a little bit older, for their entire lifetimes, these have been years and years of trying to use the actual like legislative and like actual like the rules of society, that you could use them to try and like fix and make our society better. So trying to like legalize, gay marriage and having abortion, be legal in the United States, and all of trying to play by the rules while the other side was not playing by the rules, and then basically has then reversed a lot of progress that has been made over the course of like 20, 30, 40 years, is incredibly frustrating. And so when you see something that's like vigilante justice, which is exactly actually what Bernard is talking to Sim's wife about, which is, and
Mhm.
she's like, no, we would never let like vigilante justice happen, right? Like, I think
Right.
that like what I'm
Or
saying
that
is
or
I
that it's
think
like, you know what? Let people, play stupid games, win stupid prizes, let people pay for the consequences of their own actions, and then Robert brings up like, yeah, but if it impairs us, then maybe we'll sort of wag the finger at it.
yeah. So all I'm saying is like I feel like that thing that happened in real life has led to like these conversations about like why there was so much why that reaction happened, and the people who are like kind of like grossed out by that reaction, I think, are maybe missing the piece of like the relentless frustration of like being told to play by the rules when the rules are not like there's another side that's not playing by the rules, and trying to use the rules is a slow and arduous and frustrating path forward in terms of like trying to fix society. And so I do think like, not that I think that like the show's gonna like talk about all of that, but it is interesting to me in the ecosystem where you have this guy who is willing to sort of like be part of the rebellion, but only in so much of the way of like, oh, I will follow the letter of the law, or that's the way he's going to try to like maybe use the pact to like, up until the point where you can like they could actually use the pact the way it's written, and follow the law, because he's choosing not to arrest. Well, I guess he's choosing not to arrest Shirley and Knox because he knows that they didn't actually they didn't actually murder
Right. He
anybody.
he
So
basically is like he's trying to get everyone's statement to basically give him like almost legal word of law that okay, they officially say they did not kill Meadows, and now I have evidence to believe that I need to launch a formal investigation to truly look into whether or not it was an inside job, which again is sort of his own form of rebelling and not immediately taking these people in. And I really enjoy it again as an arc of the character. I will say, like, to have the Patrick Kennedy route after having a whole episode realizing he's not dead, another episode searching for him, and then like another 2/3 of an episode of him just being like a belligerent asshole who's like, yeah, thanks for digging that bullet out of my shoulder. I don't need to give you any lore right now. Like, thank God Billings moved that chair as aggressively as he did to just get the piece of information that we all knew about. And I'm not to say that I necessarily don't want to see characters react to new information for the first time when we know everything. It just was a little bit to me like, and especially the way Patrick Kennedy's like, I'm about to blow your mind with this. Your life is going to change forever. Like, maybe that's the case, but from our perspective, we're saying, oh yeah, that thing we already knew is the thing that's going to put etch a new phase of his life and permanent marker. Yeah, I guess so. Not a big deal for us.
But okay, the thing I do like about this is that the thing that he thinks has technically like ruined his life and that he thinks he's telling is actually a lie. That thing is wrong. So I actually do find that kind of interesting. And this is kind of where I was going with the Bernard stuff earlier, and that he both has to uphold the truth. The truth is you can't leave the silo. And he also, in a way, when he's choosing to punish somebody, has to uphold this fake thing that they've chosen to do because they think that that is more likely to uphold the actual truth, which is show people the fake version of the outside. Now, the fact that Kennedy is one of the only people to have seen it who has not seen it and then died. To me,
I'm
actually
pretty sure that that other computer redhead guy is Dunzo on the show and in life. Not in real life, but in the life of the silo.
I don't mind the Kennedy stuff. I think it's interesting in the way that this thing of people thinking like, I mean, this is so much of what the first 2 episodes are based off of, right? Is like the idea of like, what if we can go outside, what if we can do it? And I think that there's a way in which that, to me, this scene most ties everything in together because it is the revealing of information that is exactly what Juliet is most worried about. So there's a difference about
people quite literally get the wrong idea.
There's a difference between a rebellion to overthrow the current system and to maintain what's happening in Silo 18 and have the impression because they can't go outside and try to figure out a way to eventually get outside versus a rebellion like we saw at the beginning of the season with Silo 17 that leads to everybody leaving and dying. And I actually think that like the idea that he's I actually really like this part. I actually like the Kennedy revealing that the thing that he is so like caught up in and is like ruined his life is a thing that's a lie, that the more that gets spread around, and you can almost see the way in which like if that information gets like if it keeps spreading and then Billings then has to like rein in the thing that he potentially helped, like if to stop people from doing that to me is that like the idea of the rebellion happening while also you have another ingredient in the mix of someone trying to is okay with the rebellion happening but not them thinking they can go outside, to me is interesting. So
yeah, it's this fun like double sense of irony, and like it might get to a point where you have 2 of the most reasonable characters and pragmatic characters on the show in Billings and Bernard, and Billings is like, no, don't you see this program? It was all a lie. We can go outside. And Bernard's like, no, seriously, I'm telling you, that's not the case. And of course, nobody believes him because at this point he has built up just like this entire record full of shady stuff and fudging the truth and everything like that, and it could lead to an outcome where they all walk out to their deaths and he was right at the end of the day.
Yeah. So I kind of like I think anything that feels like it gets closer to the main central conceit of the show which is like Juliet and how it connects to the Silo 17 stuff, to me is better than the stuff that, like, unfortunately just the Shirley Knox stuff just doesn't work for me at all.
Well, let's talk on that note about where we leave things, because again, I think the conflict is definitely brewing. As you said, they now are locked, stocked, and barreled up to the nines. They have weapons, albeit like, ones that they utilize from their daily existence, as well as some makeshift weapons as well. Now it seems like it truly is going to be like a bit of a battle of territory, right? That they have kind of like annexed floor 120 in a way. And Knox seemingly doesn't stop there, right? Like, I think at the moment, Mechanical's MO is going to be, all right, we have our self-sustaining food source now. We will keep the lights on and keep doing what we're doing as long as we are not bothered. But when Knox is standing on those stairs and and says, you may kill 10 of us today, but we're going to kill you all. That does sound like a bit more of a long-term goal. So where do you see things? Is this a meaningful step forward, in your opinion, to inevitably, when this pot boils over and we get like an outright skirmish between all these characters?
Yeah, I do think part of it is that I kind of wanted, I kind of would have actually felt like I would have liked something to happen at the beginning where the rebellion almost happens, and there, I guess we did get that, right? I guess who's the guy who died from
Cooper.
Cooper died. Yeah. So I, I guess my complaint isn't true, because I feel like they did try, they got stopped, and now this is like, okay, we're slowly making our way back to the point where we
Mhm.
might be able to like try that again and it works. So yeah, I do think it's a good, yeah, it's fun. I struggle with the fact that like the floors go they go up in number as they go down. That to
Mhm.
me is still I still can't get my head wrapped around that, even though that
Yeah,
makes
it's,
sense.
it's like negative numbers.
Yeah, it's like negative numbers. Yeah. Otherwise, I think that's just fine. I just, again, and it's so tough, but I just, our three central rebellion leaders, I struggle the most to care about them. At least the season 2 versions of them with Walker, but then Knox and Shirley. So it is what it is.
When it comes to Death Watch, Grace, is the fact that Shirley and
Oh,
Knox begin to, not literally, but metaphorically, start to consummate their relationship, does that help or hurt their chances of one or both of them surviving the season?
completely hurts that one of them is dead for sure. I think, Mike. I think they gotta, right? One of them has to die.
Yeah, unless like the Romeo and Juliet style, even though Juliet doesn't know how the real play ends, they like both
Yeah.
leaders end up dying in each other's arms
Both
by the end of the
leaders.
season.
Oh,
That's Oh no, yeah, Grace, I'm so sorry.
no, it's yeah. I think one of them has to die for sure.
Yeah, any bet as to whom at this moment?
Um, I think I'm happier. Just, I think Knox probably is more. Surely got the backstory stuff with Juliet, so like them
That's
reconnecting
the
at
thing.
some
Yeah,
point.
I think there would be more heart in Juliet reconnecting with Shirley than with Knox. But then again, the show is really trying to like honestly make us like Knox in season 2, making up for a lot of lost time. So maybe they felt like they had
Yeah.
done a good enough job, and they rip out our hearts by killing Shirley.
The other people I would put on the board, I do think that the Walker Peter convo, in terms of like talking about whether Juliet's dead, I could see either one of them dying, and my gut instinct is that it's Ian Glenn, because he is still billed as, I believe, a guest star on the
Oh
show.
man, that's the Meadows curse.
Yeah. The idea of dying to help fulfill the like symbolic nature of Juliet lives in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Not realizing that she's still alive, to me, would track thematically as well. So I would put Walker um or Juliet's dad Peter on the board of like people I would not be totally surprised to see die by the end of the season.
I would agree with that, and especially from a Pete perspective, not even from not Billings side of things, but also like with the idea of generations and what we carry down from those above us from a staircase perspective as well as from a family perspective, to have Juliet sort of become the Pete in that if she comes back and like all of her family is dead and her kind
Yeah.
of carrying forward that tragedy and how does that impact her, does kind of feel like it carries through as a theme more so than somebody like Walker, unless again they really just want to stomp all over her hearts and like have her work so hard to finally reunite with Carla only for her to die in the process.
Yeah, I would put more money on like the fact that like actually Carla and Walker not being together all season, they feel more likely to like get together and be together into season 3 than I put Knox and Shirley, who've just got together. The other thing I was going to I also think that like Peter's job and role, like he's done so much actual like tangible good this season. Not that Walker's been more like metaphorical, like rah rah speech good. Peter is like let the couple have a baby, came down, like saved Kennedy. I feel like he has the speech with Bernard. I feel like he's set up so perfectly now to be like thank you for all your service. You will now die.
Well, you talk about setting things up for future seasons, Grace. We very much buried the lead under 120 plus
Oh yeah,
floors of
I
concrete
know.
here.
Yeah, true.
In between recording episodes,
Yes.
Silo officially renewed for season 3 and a final season 4. So there has been plenty of talk, especially among those who have read the books, as to your earlier point, the pace that they're going at. How are they expecting to structure and plot things out? The good news is it does seem like Graham Yost and company, now they officially have an end goal, right? They know that they are going to have 4 seasons and only 4 seasons. Does this impact for you the way that you are viewing the show, knowing that there's a lot of deliberateness of perhaps working under season 2, knowing probably from their perspective that there would be at least a season 3, if not 4, before they landed the plane?
Yeah, this makes me understand the pacing of the show so far way less, because my
Mm,
my prevailing theory was that the weird pacing was essentially like, yeah, give this show 10 episode run so that there's like kind of as much silo content if it like breaks out as a massive hit. The ending thing, that is strange to me. The only real thing I can, sort of like see is Rebecca Ferguson being like, I'm not going to do a lot of this show. I'll do 4 seasons. And that was sort of the agreement. Otherwise, this is a bit of a surprise to me, but one that I like. I do like when a show, I think that we are in an era that I think is being a little bit smarter about knowing that, like, if you end up having a dissatisfying ending, it can
mhm.
really tarnish the legacy of your show. And so if you
Yes.
get to the point where the later seasons are become, I mean, the best example of it right now, Mike, is Dexter. And we
Mhm.
talked about this after this Taryn, but like that's a show that was like, so season 4, I believe, is, I think that's the Trinity Killers. So the end of
Yes, it's
season
the
4
John
is like,
John Lithgow season.
is so good, and I can't believe that show's legacy has been tarnished the way it is, and that's
Mhm.
entirely just because like we should just try to keep making more of them and make more money off of it. I'm very appreciative of like when both the network or the creators, whoever decided to do this, put some restraint on it. And this also, yeah, means we are more like you. We may not still like it, but it is arguably a more definitive ending, and I feel like sometimes we don't always get that with television shows.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah,
So and also provide, I think, an interesting conversation for seasons 3 and 4 as well. Not only, oh, is there going to be more to tell? How are they going to, package all this? But again, as someone who is a devoted follower of Lost, we talk a lot about how after the show had determined where it was going to go, it veered in a direction where it felt like so many plot points were deliberate and there was a lot less kind of treading water and just trying to fill the episode order. So I'm
yeah.
very excited. I mean, it also feels like pretty rarefied air. Like, I know For All Mankind
Yeah,
got
that was the
renewed.
other comp I was gonna make, because I felt like this actually could have been a For All Mankind that just kind of like that. I think it's coming back for its 5th
It's
season.
coming back for its 5th season. Slow Horses obviously has been renewed for seasons 5 and 6. Morning Show has
Yeah.
been renewed for season 4. But outside of that, I feel like it's pretty rarefied air for Apple shows to make it past 4 seasons, which also
Mhm.
intrigues me with Severance as well. Obviously, we're all the way back at season 2 for that one. But like, if there is an overall goal, with Netflix, they typically say with the streamers that they tend to go for like 3 seasons that they don't immediately get canceled and then they get taken off. I wonder if 4 is like somewhat the magic number for Apple and how much that might apply to Silo.
Well, there's a few shows exactly at that mark as well. With Shrinking, just
Mhm.
finishing up its 2nd season, is going to come back for a 3rd season, and then Ted Lasso they're trying to bring back for a 4th season as well. But that was given a sort of a 3-season arc, and now I think that they're like, it's actually been the most popular thing on our on our network all the time, so we should redo it. Apple's in this really interesting place because I think that they have some of the best TV, but they are still one of the least subscribed to
Yeah.
streamers of anything that's out there. So and to me, their play has always been like, it seems like get big stars to come in hopes that like that draws people in, and then they can fill enough content that like once you finish watching something, you have something else to watch. So I do feel like they have a good little, library content at the moment. And so this one is I, I I certainly think season 2, but I think my same complaints for season 2 are the same ones I have for season 1, which is I feel like this is very much a like, it's very good, or I'm like, this is fine type of content in any given episode. And I think the pacing in season 1 was really weird sometimes. And that's basically my same complaint thus far into season 2. When it's really good, it's really, really good, Mike. It's just that when it's like mid, it does feel pretty mid, and then you feel like you're sort of like struggling to get through the episode. But like, this is also a show that I do think like, I don't think I've come out of an episode talking with you and felt like I liked it even less than I did. I feel like I often am like, oh yeah, I guess they are trying to do the thing that I think that they're
Right.
doing, and maybe it's just not like up to my standards, but it is good. So
Yeah, well, maybe we'll try to lift your mood about the ending. Last thing I want to talk about is, again, the now for something completely different of this episode, which is Juliet lives. And we see that after, succumbing to her nasty infection last week, after finding out, some disturbing things about Solo, she wakes up still in Silo 17, or Silo, perhaps, if I'm misreading Lucas's
yeah,
coding
right.
there. And again, it's not full misery as I thought it would be last week, but like, it's very low-key threatening, right? Where Solo's like, oh, hey, I'm able to help you feel better. Thank goodness I made those antibiotics. By the way, I'm holding your escape suit hostage until you do my thing, but I'm trying to do it in the friendliest way possible.
This feels so video game to me, Mike, of like, you can't do this thing until you do this thing, and then you can go to that level and you can level up. It's
So
like,
is the
okay.
pump a side quest then, or is it main story?
No, I mean, it is main story, but it's like the annoying main story. It's like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, I gotta go do that thing before I can do the next part. That's
Yeah,
really what it feels like.
yeah, it's like when you start like the game as a Zelda game as Link, and you don't have the Master Sword or like the most powerful shield, and it's like, okay, I have to complete this story. I have to go into this dungeon to get the boomerang all over again. Like, she had the suit and then she lost it. I will say that, I don't know, maybe I'll be eating my words next week when we talk about episode 7, but I kind of wish that they ended episode 6 on the Bernard making Lucas his shadow, and then started episode 7 on this. I was fine without the Juliet Solo stuff. As strong as I agree the stuff in Silo 17 was, I don't know how I necessarily felt about it as not only a follow-up to the previous cliffhanger, but a cliffhanger as well. It almost feels like a setup for next episode being Juliet fixes the pump. I would have been totally fine if this was our cold pre-credits open.
Yeah, what's funny is that the show, I mean, this is very much a weekly show. Like, it feels like it was written that way too. I mean, I guess you could say that like cliffhanger, there is a little bit of like cliffhanger nature to binge-worthy shows, because if you can end the episode being like, oh, you gotta watch it,
Right.
watch it right away.
I mean,
But
that's why
this,
a lot of Netflix reality shows pause before the elimination, right? Because they say,
right.
oh, if you want to find out what happens next, you have to watch the next episode.
Right. Whereas this is 2 episodes back to back of basically they do feel like, certainly last week is more cliffhanger than this, but this is certainly like, this is a thing we got to do next episode. You got to watch the next episode, which is interesting for a more weekly release. Which actually feels in some ways very like old school as well, in terms of like, trying to convince you to make sure you like appointment view it the week after. I don't know whether I care whether or not it's in this episode or last episode. My critique is that I feel like the show is struggling a little bit with like filling full episodes. Like, my thing is that I feel like this would have been a sharper like 8-episode season. And so my problem with it is that I feel like they just cut out something I thought it would have been very interesting, which is Solo trying to go, like, how did he figure out where Juliet was? How did
Mm-hmm.
he, his debate about whether he should go or not get her, how did he get her back? And I'm a little annoyed that they were just like, she woke up and he's like, I saved you.
How did he make antibiotics?
I know. So I feel like that's my big critique of it, is like, I feel like they actually like, I don't mind the amount of content we got, but I kind of feel like we cut out the wrong stuff. But
And I think it's also, again, you go back to pacing. We found out a lot of this disquieting information about Solo, that he was lying about his origin story. And this is like yet another interesting quirk of this quirk-filled man, that, he's not necessarily this idiot that stumbled into taking on the role of the IT Shadow. Despite him loudly insisting that he is the IT Shadow, he clearly wasn't. But
yeah.
he seems to be a very smart person beneath the kind of goofy veneer that Steve Zahn presents. And because we spent so much time away from 17, we kind of took a pause in the action. I imagine that we are going to go all in and all underwater next episode, now that Juliet has another mission that she needs to complete. And not to say that, again, I didn't not like the stuff that was going on in 18, but yeah, it is interesting how this man continues to mystify us, including being a bit of a pharmacologist.
I liked the convo between them. I like the idea of her saying like, if you need to do it, because like I will die. And she's like, but there's like thousands of people who will die over there. And he goes, but that you might not even be able to do that, but you could do that. I like this.
Right.
I like the scene.
It's this weird sort of like trolley problem where he says, well, the other side has 10,000 people on it, but if you switch
That's
the
right.
trolley, there's
That's
still a
right.
chance that like they might die anyway. A bomb might go off. So you guarantee that you can help me, the living, breathing person in front of you, rather than all those metaphoric people out there.
Yeah, I like that stuff. I think is like really strong. I think that like the sort of existential debates and philosophy. Obviously, that's something that like I'm maybe more interested than the show is. Like talked about the Luigi assassination and Billings, and I'm like, ooh, that would be fun. And I don't know that the show is actually interested, but it isn't here. It is this little. And again, this is why I'm like, oh man, I would have spent so much more time watching Solo try to get Juliet, because I'm like, the like one scene we get that's like 5 minutes is one of the best things I saw in the episode. So, it is what it is.
Well, I imagine we're going to get more of it next episode. Though I also think we got to spend a healthy dose of stuff in Silo 18 because, again, things are really, really tense right there. Even
Yeah.
more than they were before, with now the mechanical people like formally acknowledging the fact that everyone upstairs is trying to kill them. And now they've encroached upon some territory, like, and the threat that Nox gave. It's
Yeah.
only episode 7 next week of 10. So I don't think things are going to break out immediately, but I think things are going to continue to accelerate, and we will promptly keep on accelerating. We'll pump the brakes next week to let you all know what happened and our thoughts about it. But happy to be alongside in the car with you, Grace, riding shotgun like the ones that were fashioned by that guy in Mechanical.
Yeah, well, I'll see you next week. I know they're dropping an episode. I believe you folks don't celebrate this day down in, I believe it's I guess it comes out the day after Boxing Day. But we'll see if how quickly we can get an episode. I know we're probably a little bit later for some folks this week, and next week obviously a holiday filled week. So yeah, we'll
Yeah,
see.
nothing, listen, the skies get a little darker around the holidays, and so we're going to also talk plenty about a show that deprives us of sunlight and hopefully bring some light into your feeds by talking about Silo as we approach episode 7, episode 8, to your point, should still be dropping on Fridays, and we'll bring you those podcasts as soon as possible. Last thing I'll say is you and I have our usual plugs going on a weekly basis, but I will say that, Grace, you and I took a little time away from just talking about a character named after Romeo and Juliet, talking about the stage in a brand new way. Wicked, of course, the hit musical of 20 plus years, was adapted for the screen. We are 1 month in to Wicked hitting the box office, and you and I got together with Shannon Gus and Maury Forth to give our respective backgrounds and thoughts on this hit film, our thoughts on the performances, the adaptation, all the production choices, and the effect it's kind of had on pop culture and what it's looking like in 2025 when it comes back for part 2.
Yeah, it was very fun to get to chat about that. So excited for people to listen. And I'm a little nervous about some of my hot takes that I have about some of the songs in Wicked and how people will react to them. But we shall see.
Listen, you are as bold as Billings making the call that you did. Of course, let us know your thoughts about this episode, any thoughts and theories you might have about the characters, what we should expect from episode 7 moving forward. And we'll be back, when we are able to. I hope everyone has happy holidays. And Grace and I will bring you recaps. We just kind of need to figure it out on the timing of everything. But you will have recaps at some point of Silo Season 2, Episode 7 and 8 starting next week. Thank you all, as always, for listening. Until next time, everybody, take care. Bye-bye.